Maya's hand shook as she held the boarding pass. Gate 47B. The numbers blurred through her tired eyes, but she forced herself to keep walking through the busy Los Angeles airport. Her 8-month-old son Lucas was strapped to her chest in a worn baby carrier, his small face red and scrunched up from crying. "Shh, baby, please," she whispered, gently bouncing as she walked. Her voice cracked from exhaustion. "We're almost there. Just a little bit longer." The diaper bag on her shoulder felt heavier with each step. It was held together with safety pins where the zipper had broken months ago. In her other hand, she dragged 2 stuffed duffel bags that contained everything they owned in the world. Her sister's address in New York was written on a crumpled piece of paper, tucked safely in her jacket pocket. Maya had spent her last $200 on the cheapest red-eye flight she could find. The ticket agent had looked at her like she was crazy when she paid in crumpled $20 bills, counting each one twice. But Maya didn't care about the looks. She just needed to get away from California, away from him. The bruise on her wrist was finally fading to yellow, but she still tugged her sleeve down to cover it. 3 weeks had passed since she'd gathered the courage to leave, and every day had been a struggle to save enough money for this escape. She'd worked double shifts at the diner, sometimes 16 hours a day, living on crackers and whatever leftover food the kitchen would let her take home. "Flight 891 to New York now boarding," announced a voice over the speakers. Maya's heart jumped. This was it. There was no going back now. She joined the line of passengers, most of them looking fresh and well-rested. A businessman in front of her checked his expensive watch and sighed impatiently. A woman behind her tapped her perfectly manicured nails against her phone case. Maya felt invisible among them, just another face in the crowd, which was exactly how she wanted it. Lucas let out another piercing cry, and Maya felt every eye turn toward them. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment as she tried to calm him down. She knew he was in pain. His little ears had been bothering him for days, but a doctor's visit cost money she simply didn't have. The free clinic had been booked solid for weeks. "Ma'am, do you have everything you need for the baby?" asked the flight attendant as Maya approached the boarding gate. Her smile looked forced, and her eyes held a hint of concern that made Maya's stomach clench. "Yes, I have everything," Maya said quickly, showing her boarding pass and Lucas's lap infant ticket. The flight attendant scanned both and handed them back with a nod. Walking down the narrow aisle of the airplane felt like the longest journey of Maya's life. Passengers were already settling into their seats, pulling out books and tablets, adjusting their pillows. The lucky ones in first class had so much space with seats that looked more like small couches. Maya couldn't even imagine what that kind of comfort felt like. Her seat was in the very back of the plane, next to the bathroom. She'd specifically requested it because it was the cheapest option, and she thought being near the bathroom might be helpful with Lucas. But now, seeing how cramped the space was, she wondered if she'd made a mistake. The man in the seat next to hers was already there, his laptop open and headphones on. He glanced up when she stopped at the row, and his expression immediately soured when he saw the crying baby. "Excuse me," Maya said softly, trying to manage her bags and Lucas at the same time. "I think I'm in the middle seat." The man sighed heavily and closed his laptop with more force than necessary. "Great," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for Maya to hear. "Just what I need on a red-eye flight." Maya's face burned as she squeezed into her seat. The space was so tight that her knees pressed against the seat in front of her. She tried to position Lucas comfortably, but he continued to cry, his little fists waving in the air. A woman across the aisle leaned over to her companion and whispered something that made them both look at Maya with disapproval. Maya caught the words, "Should have thought about that before having a baby," and felt tears prick at her eyes. She reached into her diaper bag and pulled out Lucas's bottle. There was barely an inch of formula left in the bottom, and she'd already used her last packet of powder that morning. She'd have to make it stretch until they landed in New York and she could find a store. "Here, sweetie," she cooed, offering Lucas the bottle. He took it eagerly, and for a blessed moment the crying stopped. But Maya could see it wouldn't last long. He was hungry, tired, and uncomfortable, just like she was. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration, but Maya barely heard the words. She was calculating in her head how much money she had left. $12.37. That had to cover a taxi from the airport to her sister's apartment, assuming Carmen would even let them stay. They hadn't spoken in over 2 years, Not since Maya had gotten involved with Lucas's father, and Carmen had warned her to stay away from him. Maya closed her eyes and tried to block out the memory of the last night in their old apartment. The shouting, the sound of something breaking against the wall, Lucas crying in his crib while she barricaded herself in the bedroom. That was the night she knew she couldn't stay anymore, no matter how scared she was of leaving. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats and prepare for takeoff," came the announcement. Maya fastened her seatbelt and held Lucas closer. Through the small window, she could see the lights of Los Angeles spreading out below them. Somewhere down there was the life she was leaving behind, the tiny apartment with the broken air conditioner, the diner where she'd worked since she was 17, the hospital where Lucas was born, where she'd held him alone because his father was too busy to show up. But also down there was the fear, the walking on eggshells, the constant worry about what mood he'd be in when he came home, the way Lucas would sometimes stop crying when he heard the front door slam, as if even at 8 months old he understood that silence was safer. The plane began to move, slowly at first, then faster as it headed down the runway. Maya felt her heart pounding as they lifted off the ground. She was 22 years old, had $43 to her name, and was flying across the country with nothing but hope that her sister would help them start over. Lucas had finished his bottle and was making soft, whimpering sounds. Maya knew he'd start crying again soon, and the thought of dealing with angry passengers for the next 5 hours made her stomach twist with anxiety. But as the plane climbed higher into the dark sky, carrying them toward a new beginning, Maya allowed herself one small moment of hope. They were free. Whatever happened next, they were finally free. Alexander Chen adjusted his leather seat and opened his laptop, ready to review the contracts from his latest business deal. The merger had taken 6 months to finalize, and by tomorrow morning, his tech company would be worth $300 million more than it was this morning. He should have felt satisfied, but success had long ago stopped giving him the thrill it once did. The first-class cabin was quiet and dimly lit, exactly the way he preferred for these long flights. His assistant had booked him the usual spot, window seat row 3, away from the noise and chaos of economy class. At 35, Alexander had been flying first class for over a decade, and he'd grown accustomed to the peace and luxury it provided. That peace was shattered the moment a baby started crying somewhere behind him. Alexander's jaw tightened as the wailing continued. He glanced at his expensive watch. They hadn't even finished boarding yet, and already some parent was failing to control their child. He pulled out his noise-canceling headphones and slipped them on, but even the latest technology couldn't completely block out the sound. The crying grew louder and more desperate as more passengers boarded. Alexander tried to focus on his work, scrolling through emails about tomorrow's board meeting. But the baby's distress was impossible to ignore. He found himself looking over his shoulder toward the back of the plane, wondering how long this would continue. "I'm so sorry. Please just give me a minute," came a young woman's voice, strained and exhausted. Alexander could see her now, a girl who looked barely out of her teens, struggling to manage bags and a crying infant, while other passengers squeezed past her in the narrow aisle. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and even from this distance, he could see the exhaustion written across her face. A businessman pushed past her roughly, muttering something about people who shouldn't travel with babies. The young mother's shoulders sagged, but she kept trying to soothe her child, bouncing gently and whispering soft words. Alexander found himself watching her instead of working. There was something about her determination, the way she kept apologizing to everyone around her while clearly being overwhelmed herself. She reminded him of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. The plane began to taxi toward the runway, and the baby's crying intensified. Alexander could hear other passengers starting to complain. Someone behind him groaned loudly about the long flight ahead. A woman across the aisle made a sharp comment about inconsiderate parents. He tried to return to his laptop, but concentration was impossible. The baby's cries seemed to pierce right through him, and he found himself feeling genuinely sorry for both the child and its mother. This wasn't the usual mild annoyance he felt at disruptions. During his flights, this was something else entirely. 20 minutes into the flight, when the seatbelt sign finally turned off, Alexander watched a flight attendant march toward the back of the plane with a stern expression. Her name tag read Rebecca, and she had the kind of practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Ma'am," Rebecca said, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin, "your baby has been crying since we boarded. Is there something wrong with him?" "He has an ear infection," the young mother replied quietly. "I'm doing everything I can to keep him comfortable." "While other passengers are complaining," Rebecca continued, her tone growing sharper, "perhaps next time you should consider purchasing a first-class ticket if you want your baby to have more room to be comfortable. Economy class isn't really appropriate for fussy infants." Alexander felt his temper flare. He'd seen Rebecca work these flights before, and she was usually professional, if not particularly warm. But this was out of line. He could see the young mother's face crumple with embarrassment and exhaustion. Without thinking, Alexander unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. He walked down the aisle, his presence immediately commanding attention. Other passengers looked up as he passed, recognizing the confident stride of someone important. "Rebecca," he said calmly when he reached them, "is there a problem here?" The flight attendant's demeanor changed instantly. "Oh, Mr. Chen, I was just explaining to this passenger about the noise level and—" "I see," Alexander interrupted, looking at the young mother who was staring at him with wide, surprised eyes. She was even younger than he'd thought, maybe early 20s at most, with kind eyes that were currently bright with unshed tears. "Actually," Alexander continued, "my assistant was supposed to be on this flight, but she had to cancel at the last minute. Her seat is empty." He gestured toward the front of the plane. "Would you and your baby like to use it? First class has more room, which might help with his comfort." The young mother's mouth fell open. I couldn't possibly. I mean, I didn't pay for—" "The seat is going unused anyway," Alexander said gently. "And honestly, having a little one nearby doesn't bother me at all. I have nephews." This was a lie. Alexander was an only child and had no nephews, but something about this girl's situation touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Rebecca looked flustered. "Mr. Chen, I'm not sure airline policy allows—" "I'm sure we can make an exception," Alexander said, his tone making it clear this wasn't really a suggestion. "Could you help the lady with her bags?" "Of course, right away," Rebecca said quickly, her entire attitude shifting. The young mother looked between Alexander and Rebecca, clearly overwhelmed. "I don't understand," she said softly. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Alexander looked down at her baby, who had momentarily stopped crying and was looking up at him with curious dark eyes. The child couldn't be more than 8 or 9 months old, with chubby cheeks and tiny fingers that were now reaching toward Alexander's tie. "What's his name?" Alexander asked. "Lucas," she replied, unconsciously relaxing her grip on the baby as his crying subsided. "Hello, Lucas," Alexander said gently, and to his surprise, the baby gave him a small smile. "And you are?" "Maya," she said, still looking stunned by this turn of events. "Well, Maya, it looks like Lucas approves of the upgrade," Alexander said, noting how the baby seemed calmer now that he wasn't surrounded by the cramped conditions and hostile stares of economy class. Rebecca had already begun gathering Maya's belongings, the safety-pinned diaper bag, the 2 worn duffel bags that looked like they contained someone's entire life. Other passengers watched the unusual scene with curiosity, but Alexander ignored their stares. "I really can't accept this," Maya said, though her voice lacked conviction. Lucas had settled against her chest, his cries reduced to occasional whimpers. "You're not accepting charity," Alexander said matter-of-factly. "You're helping me out by using a seat that would otherwise go empty. Airlines hate empty seats." He could see the internal battle playing out on her face, pride warring with exhaustion, independence fighting against the desperate need for kindness. Lucas made a soft cooing sound as if adding his vote to the conversation. "Okay," Maya whispered finally. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary," Alexander said, already heading back toward first class. "Rebecca will get you settled." As he returned to his seat, Alexander realized his laptop was forgotten, the contracts unread. For the first time in months, maybe years, work was the last thing on his mind. Instead, he found himself thinking about the young mother named Maya, and wondering what circumstances had led her to be traveling alone with a sick baby, carrying everything she owned in 2 old duffel bags. Maya sank into the first-class seat and felt like she was sitting on a cloud. The leather was soft and warm, and there was so much space she could actually stretch her legs out. Lucas was still fussy in her arms, but even he seemed to sense the change in their surroundings. The constant pressure and noise from economy class was gone, replaced by a gentle hum and soft lighting. "Can I get you anything?" Rebecca asked, her voice now sweet as honey. The same flight attendant who had been so rude just minutes ago was now treating Maya like royalty. "Something to drink? Perhaps some warm milk for the baby?" Maya's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "Warm milk would be wonderful," she said quietly. "I ran out of formula and he's so hungry." "Of course. Right away," Rebecca said, hurrying off toward the galley. Alexander had returned to his seat across the aisle, but Maya could feel him glancing over occasionally. She wondered what he was thinking. Here she was in her worn jeans and faded sweater, surrounded by his expensive leather and polished wood, holding a crying baby with a safety-pinned diaper bag at her feet. She probably looked like she belonged in first class about as much as a fish belonged in a tree. "I'm sorry about this," she said to him during a moment when Lucas had quieted down. "I know you probably just want to work in peace." Alexander looked up from his laptop. "Don't apologize," he said firmly. "You haven't done anything wrong." His voice was kind, but Maya still felt out of place. She'd never been in first class before. The closest she'd come to luxury was occasionally cleaning the expensive houses on the rich side of town when she needed extra money. This felt like stepping into a different world entirely. Rebecca returned with a bottle of perfectly warmed milk, testing the temperature on her wrist like Maya's own mother used to do when Maya was little. "There you go, sweetie," she cooed to Lucas, who immediately reached for the bottle with eager hands. The change in Lucas was immediate and dramatic. He drank hungrily, his little body relaxing for the first time since they'd left Los Angeles. Within minutes, his eyes were growing heavy, and the constant whimpering finally stopped. Maya felt her own body begin to unwind as the stress of the last few hours started to fade. "Poor little guy was just hungry," Alexander observed quietly. "Among other things," Maya sighed, gently patting Lucas's back. "He's been sick and I couldn't afford to take him to the doctor. His ears have been bothering him for days." She didn't know why she was telling this stranger about their problems. Maybe it was because he'd already shown her such unexpected kindness, or maybe it was just the relief of finally having Lucas calm and comfortable. "Ear infections are rough at that age," Alexander said. "The pressure changes during takeoff and landing make it worse." Maya nodded, impressed that he seemed to know about babies. "Are you a father?" "No," Alexander replied, then seemed to consider his words carefully. "But I remember being young and having ear problems on flights. It's miserable." The plane had reached cruising altitude and the cabin lights dimmed for the overnight flight. Most of the first-class passengers were settling in with blankets and eye masks, preparing to sleep through the cross-country journey. Maya tried to get comfortable in her seat, but exhaustion was hitting her like a wave. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. Between working double shifts to save money for the flight and lying awake at night planning their escape, she'd been running on nothing but determination and coffee. Now that Lucas was finally peaceful, her body was demanding the rest it had been denied. "You should try to get some sleep," Alexander said gently, noticing her drooping eyelids. "It's going to be a long flight." "I can't," Maya said, even as her head began to nod. "I need to watch him." "He's fine now," Alexander assured her. "Besides, I'll be awake working for a while. I can keep an eye out." Maya wanted to protest, but she was beyond exhausted. Her eyelids felt like they weighed 100 pounds each. Lucas had finished his bottle and was now sleeping soundly against her chest, his tiny hand curled around her finger. The steady vibration of the plane and the soft whoosh of the air conditioning created a lulling white noise that made staying awake impossible. Maya's head began to tilt to one side as sleep crept over her. She tried to fight it, jerking her head back up each time she started to drift off, but her body had reached its limit. Despite her best efforts, exhaustion won the battle. Her head slowly tilted until it came to rest against something solid and warm. In her semi-conscious state, she didn't realize that her head had found Alexander's shoulder. Alexander felt the gentle weight of her head against him and froze. His first instinct was to wake her up, to gently guide her back. Nothing in his eyes, a flash of the kindness that had been hiding behind his calm exterior all along. "Does it matter where it came from?" he asked quietly, to her own seat. But when he looked down at her peaceful face, something stopped him. She looked so young and vulnerable in sleep. with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too much worry for someone her age. Lucas was curled against his mother's chest, both of them finally at rest after what had clearly been a difficult journey. Alexander made a decision that surprised even him. He would not move. He would not wake her. For however long she needed to sleep, he would be her pillow. Very carefully, Alexander set his laptop aside and settled back in his seat, trying to find a position that would be comfortable for both of them. Maya stirred slightly at the movement, and for a moment he thought she might wake up. Instead, she seemed to relax even more, her breathing becoming deep and steady. As the hours passed, Alexander found himself studying the young woman who had literally fallen asleep on his shoulder. Her clothes were clean but worn, the kind of tired fabric that had seen too many washings. Her shoes were scuffed sneakers with a small hole near the big toe that had been carefully covered with a piece of matching tape. When the cabin temperature dropped, Alexander noticed Maya shiver slightly in her sleep. Without hesitation, he pressed the call button. Rebecca appeared almost instantly, moving quietly in the darkened cabin. "Could you bring a blanket?" Alexander whispered, gesturing toward Maya. Rebecca's expression softened as she took in the scene, the young mother sleeping peacefully while the baby dozed in her arms. She returned with one of the airline's premium blankets, the soft kind reserved for first-class passengers. Very gently, Alexander helped drape the blanket over both Maya and Lucas, being careful not to wake them. Maya made a small sound of contentment and seemed to burrow deeper into the warmth. From his awkward angle, Alexander could see some of Maya's belongings that had spilled slightly from her open purse. There was a crumpled envelope with final notice stamped in red letters, a business card for a women's shelter, a photograph of her holding Lucas as a newborn, both of them in a hospital bed but no partner in sight. The pieces of her story began forming in Alexander's mind. Young single mother, running from something bad enough to flee across the country with a sick baby and almost no money, no family support system, or at least none in California. Alexander had seen enough business deals go bad, enough personal situations turn ugly to recognize the signs. Maya wasn't just traveling, she was escaping. As the night wore on, Lucas stirred a few times, making soft baby sounds that might have woken other passengers. But Alexander was ready each time, gently patting the baby's back or making quiet shushing sounds until Lucas settled back into sleep. He found himself surprisingly good at the gentle movements needed to keep a baby calm. At one point, Lucas opened his eyes and looked directly at Alexander. For a moment, man and baby studied each other in the dim cabin light. Then Lucas gave him a small, sleepy smile before closing his eyes again. Alexander felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced in years of corporate success and material achievement. Here in this airplane, 30,000 feet above the ground, holding perfectly still so a desperate young mother could finally rest, he felt more useful than he had in a long time. The gentle rumble of the plane's engines changing pitch slowly pulled Maya from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. Her body felt heavy and warm, more comfortable than she'd been in ages. For a moment, she forgot where she was, floating in that peaceful space between dreams and waking. Then reality crashed back. Maya's eyes flew open to find herself leaning against something solid and warm. Not something, someone. She was pressed against Alexander's shoulder, her head tucked into the curve of his neck, and Lucas was still sleeping peacefully in her arms. The businessman who had shown her such incredible kindness was sitting perfectly still, his laptop closed on his lap, looking out the window as New York's lights came into view below. Horror washed over her as she realized what had happened. She had fallen asleep on a complete stranger. Not just any stranger, but a man who was clearly important and wealthy. Someone who had already done more for her than anyone had in years, and she had repaid his kindness by using him as a pillow for what felt like hours. "Oh my God," Maya gasped, jerking upright so quickly that Lucas stirred in her arms. "I'm so sorry. I can't believe I didn't mean to." Her face burned with embarrassment as she tried to scoot away from Alexander, putting as much distance between them as the airplane seat would allow. Alexander turned from the window with a gentle smile that completely contradicted the mortification she was feeling. "Good morning," he said quietly, his voice warm and completely lacking any trace of annoyance. "Did you sleep well?" "I slept on you," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe I did that. You must think I think you're a mother who was exhausted and finally got the rest she needed. Alexander interrupted gently. There's nothing to apologize for. Maya stared at him, unable to process his calm reaction. Any normal person would be annoyed, maybe even angry at having a stranger fall asleep on them during a flight. But Alexander seemed genuinely unbothered, as if having someone use him as a human pillow was the most natural thing in the world. For how long? She asked, dreading the answer. A few hours, Alexander said casually. You needed the sleep. Lucas slept peacefully too. As if responding to his name, Lucas opened his eyes and looked up at Alexander with what could only be described as recognition. The baby made a soft cooing sound and reached out with one tiny hand toward the man who had helped watch over him through the night. He remembers you, Maya said in wonder, watching as Alexander gently touched Lucas's small fingers. Smart boy, Alexander replied, then looked back at Maya. How do you feel? Maya took inventory of herself. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt truly rested. Her head was clear. Her body didn't ache with exhaustion, and even Lucas seemed more alert and comfortable than he'd been since getting sick. Better, she admitted. I haven't slept like that I can't remember how long. Good, Alexander said simply. You needed it. The plane was beginning its descent into JFK Airport, and other passengers were starting to stir around them. Maya looked out the window at the sprawling city below and felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. In less than an hour, she'd be on her own again, with less than $50 and no guarantee that her sister would even let them stay. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into New York, came the pilot's voice over the intercom. Please return your seats to their upright position and prepare for landing. Maya started gathering her few belongings, trying to organize her life back into the worn diaper bag and 2 duffel bags. Everything she and Lucas owned in the world fit into those 3 containers, and the reality of that hit her harder than usual. Alexander was putting his laptop away, moving with the efficient motions of someone who traveled frequently. Maya watched him and tried to imagine what his life must be like. Flying first class, staying in nice hotels, never having to worry about whether he could afford his next meal or if his baby was getting proper medical care. Maya, Alexander said, interrupting her thoughts. She looked up to find him holding a large manila envelope, the kind businesses used for important documents. Her name was written across the front in neat handwriting. The flight attendant asked me to give this to you, he said, extending the envelope toward her. Something about airline policy for passengers who were upgraded. Maya frowned, confused. I don't understand. What kind of policy? I'm not sure, Alexander said with a slight shrug. Maybe some kind of customer service thing? You should probably open it. Maya took the envelope hesitantly. It was heavier than she expected, and something inside rustled when she moved it. She looked at Alexander, who had returned to organizing his own belongings, then carefully opened the envelope. The first thing she saw was a check. Her hands started shaking as she looked at the numbers written in careful script. $50,000, made out to Maya Rodriguez. This can't be right, she whispered, staring at the check like it might disappear if she blinked. This has to be a mistake. But there were other things in the envelope. Maya pulled out a business card for Dr. Patricia Winters, Pediatric Medicine. On the back, someone had written, Lucas's appointment scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m., already paid in full. Her hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely hold the items. Next came a set of keys attached to a small card with an address in Queens and a note. 1-bedroom apartment, furnished, first year's rent paid, no strings attached. Finally, there was an official-looking letter on company letterhead. Maya's eyes scanned the words, job offer, Chen Industries subsidiary, starting salary $45,000 per year, full health benefits, on-site childcare available. Maya's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. She looked up at Alexander, who was still calmly putting away his things as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. I don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. This isn't from the airline, is it? Alexander glanced over at her, and for just a moment she saw so. Yes, it matters, Maya said, tears now streaming down her cheeks. This is everything. This is a whole life. This is hope. And I don't even know your last name, Chen, he said simply. Alexander Chen. Maya's eyes widened as she looked at the letterhead again. Chen Industries. The company offering her a job was his company. Everything clicked into place. The first-class seat, the way the flight attendant had treated him with such deference, the expensive clothes and confident manner. "You did this," she whispered. "All of it. The check, the apartment, the job, the doctor's appointment. Why?" Alexander finished packing his briefcase and stood up, preparing to disembark as the plane taxied to the gate. Other passengers were gathering their belongings, eager to get off the plane and start their day. "Because everyone deserves a chance," he said, looking down at her with those same kind eyes that had first offered help when she was struggling with Lucas in economy class. "And because sometimes we meet people when they need help the most." Maya tried to stand, still clutching the envelope and all its life-changing contents, but her legs felt weak. Lucas was awake now, looking around with bright, curious eyes that seemed so much clearer than they had been during the flight. "I can't accept this," she said, though her voice lacked any real conviction. "It's too much. I'll never be able to pay you back." "Then don't," Alexander said as passengers began filing off the plane. "Just take care of Lucas and build a good life for both of you." He started to walk away, then paused and looked back at her one more time. "The apartment comes with a crib and everything a baby needs," he said with a small smile. "And Dr. Winters is excellent. She'll take good care of Lucas's ears." Maya sat there in stunned silence as Alexander disappeared into the crowd of departing passengers, leaving her holding a future she'd never dared to dream of. 3 months later, Maya stood in front of her bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Her cheeks had color again, her eyes were bright, and she'd gained back the weight she'd lost during those desperate months in California. Lucas was babbling happily in his crib, playing with the soft toys that came with the furnished apartment Alexander had provided. The apartment in Queens was small, but perfect. It had everything a mother and baby could need. A real crib instead of the makeshift bed Lucas had been sleeping in. A kitchen table where Maya could eat actual meals instead of crackers. And windows that let in morning sunlight without the fear of someone she didn't want to see looking in. Maya walked to Lucas's crib and picked him up, marveling at how healthy he looked. Dr. Winters had been everything Alexander promised. Kind, thorough, and completely unconcerned about payment since everything had been taken care of in advance. Lucas's ear infection was long gone, and he was hitting every milestone a baby his age should reach. "Ready for daycare, little man?" Maya asked, kissing his forehead. Lucas giggled and grabbed at her hair, something he'd started doing more often now that he wasn't constantly fighting pain and discomfort. The job at Chen Industries had turned out to be even better than the letter promised. Maya worked in their customer service department, helping people solve problems with their software. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady. It paid well, and her supervisor had been understanding about the learning curve. Best of all, the company's daycare center was just 2 floors down from her office, so she could visit Lucas during lunch breaks. Maya had tried countless times to reach Alexander to thank him properly. She'd called the main number for Chen Industries dozens of times, but his assistant always gave her the same polite response. "Mr. Chen is pleased to hear you're doing well, but he's not available for calls." She'd written letters that were never answered and even tried showing up at the company's Manhattan headquarters, but security wouldn't let her pass the lobby without an appointment. It was as if Alexander Chen had become a ghost, disappearing as completely as he'd appeared in her life that night on the airplane. Maya had started taking night classes at the community college, studying business management with the goal of maybe starting her own company someday. It seemed impossible, but then again, 6 months ago, the idea of having a stable home and job had seemed impossible too. This morning, Maya decided to try a new coffee shop near her office before work. The place was busy with the usual crowd of commuters and business people getting their caffeine fix before starting their day. Maya ordered her usual, a simple coffee and a muffin, and was waiting for her order when she saw him. Alexander Chen was sitting at a corner table, reading something on his tablet while drinking what looked like black coffee. He was dressed in another expensive suit, but he looked more relaxed than he had on the airplane. Maya's heart started pounding as she recognized the man who had changed her entire life. For a moment, she just stood there, unsure what to do. Part of her wanted to rush over and thank him, while another part worried that he might not want to be bothered by someone from his past good deed. But Lucas started making happy sounds when he saw Alexander, as if he remembered the kind stranger from the plane. Taking a deep breath, Maya walked over to his table. Alexander looked up as she approached, and his serious expression immediately softened into a warm smile. "Maya," he said, standing up from his chair. "How are you? How's Lucas?" "We're good," Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're really good. Thanks to you." Alexander gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please sit down. I'd love to hear how you're doing." Maya settled into the chair, adjusting Lucas on her lap. "I've been trying to reach you for months," she said. "I wanted to thank you, to tell you how much everything you did has meant to us." "My assistant mentioned you'd called," Alexander said with a slight smile. "You don't need to thank me, Maya. I can see you're doing well. That's thanks enough. But I do need to thank you," Maya insisted. "What you did for us. You saved our lives. Lucas is healthy and happy. I have a job I actually enjoy, a safe place to live, and I'm taking college classes. None of that would have been possible without your help." Alexander looked at Lucas, who was trying to grab the sugar packets from the table dispenser. "He looks great. Much happier than he was on the plane." "Dr. Winters says he's perfectly healthy now," Maya said. "And the daycare at work is amazing. He loves it there." "I'm glad," Alexander said simply. Maya studied his face, trying to understand the man who had shown such extraordinary kindness to complete strangers.
"Can I ask you something?"
"Why did you do it? I mean, really, why did you help us? Most people would have just been annoyed by a crying baby and moved on with their lives." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee even though it didn't need stirring. When he finally looked up, Maya saw something vulnerable in his eyes. 30 years ago, he said slowly, "my mother was in a situation a lot like yours. She was young, alone, and scared. She was trying to get away from a bad situation with me in tow. I was just a baby then, maybe a little older than Lucas." Maya listened intently, sensing that this was a story Alexander didn't tell often. "We were on a Greyhound bus," he continued. "It was the middle of the night and I was crying. My mother was exhausted just like you were. She hadn't slept in days and she was so worried about disturbing other passengers that she was near tears herself." Alexander paused, lost in the memory. "There was a man sitting next to us. An older gentleman in a worn jacket who looked like he worked with his hands for a living. He could have complained about the noise or asked to move seats. Instead, he did something simple but incredibly kind." "What did he do?" Maya asked softly. "He took off his jacket and made it into a pillow against his shoulder. Then he told my mother that she looked tired and should rest, that he'd keep an eye out. She was so exhausted that she fell asleep leaning against this stranger, just like you fell asleep on me." Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes as she understood. "That man sat perfectly still for hours so my mother could sleep," Alexander said. "When we reached our destination, he helped us with our bags and wished us luck. We never saw him again, but that one act of kindness gave my mother the strength to keep going. She always said that strangers' kindness saved us both." "So when you saw me on the plane," Maya began. "I saw my mother," Alexander finished. "I saw someone who needed help, and I remembered what it felt like to be on the receiving end of unexpected kindness." Maya wiped tears from her cheeks. "What happened to you and your mother after that?" "She worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school," Alexander said with pride in his voice. "She became a pediatric nurse and spent her whole career taking care of sick children. She passed away 5 years ago, but she never forgot that bus ride or the stranger who helped us." "She sounds like an amazing woman," Maya said. "She was. And she taught me that sometimes we're put in people's paths for a reason, maybe to help or maybe to receive help. The important thing is to pay attention to those moments." Lucas had fallen asleep in Maya's arms, comfortable and content. Maya looked down at her peaceful son and thought about all the good things that had come from one stranger's kindness on an airplane. "I want to do something," Maya said suddenly, "to honor what you did for us and what that man did for you and your mother. I want to help other people who are in situations like I was." Alexander's eyes lit up with interest. "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know exactly yet," Maya admitted. "Maybe volunteer at shelters or help single mothers find resources. I want to pass it forward somehow." "I think that's a beautiful idea," Alexander said. "And if you ever need help with that project, you know where to find me." As Maya prepared to leave for work, Alexander stood up with her. "Take care of yourself, Maya, and take care of Lucas." "I will," she promised. "And Alexander, thank you for showing me that there are still good people in the world." Alexander smiled. Thank you for reminding me why kindness matters. Maya left the coffee shop with a light heart and a new purpose. She didn't know exactly what form her helping others would take, but she knew that the circle of kindness that had started with a stranger on a bus 30 years ago was far from over.